orcs are one of the most numerous species in the galaxy. While they may seem as nothing more than a clan of raving mad brawlers, when they go to war it can be a truly horrifying experience for their opponents. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we're covering the crusade rules for the orcs, because, well, I'm going on crusade, and I love crusade, it's very cool, so I want to cover the rules. So first up we have to muster the war, and the first step in that is getting your war boss together. So your force must include one war boss, and when mustering your crusade force, select one war boss to become your war boss. This offers some special abilities and interactions with the other orc rules. Your war boss is really the perfect starting point to set up where your army is going to go, as you can see with my mega armored war boss on the right here that I'm using for my crusade. It really lets you develop the character and decide where you want to take your army. So really just go off the walls, really. Pick a clan or make up your own and decide what kind of tactics they use and make your war boss the epitome of that. And I would recommend bringing a legends unit just to shake those competitive chains off, because this is all about fun, so let's bring some stuff you can't usually use. So in terms of boss ideas for the various clans, starting off with the Goths, I think it's only right to go with a normal war boss using renowned heroes, which allows him to always have an enhancement from any of his detachments, to give him Edwapa's Kill Choppa to represent his extra mightiness in combat, since there's no mucking about after all. Then, from there, with their upgrades, you want to focus on making him tougher and fightier with perhaps the Crushing Armor, or the Iron Gob from the Bestest Boss loot, and every boss should have a proper boss pull, so make sure to not leave that behind, to keep the boys in check during the war. For the bad moods, I would recommend a Mega Armored boss actually, mainly because he's rather shooty than most of the other foot bosses, though a War Trike also offers a lot of shooty power. Either way, get them a modified weapon ASAP, and with the shootiest blaster they'll be unleashing a huge amount of Daka. For the Blood Axes, I would again recommend a normal war boss, give him the faster than use enhancement with renowned heroes, and get him something like a Chinork Warcopter, allowing him and his sneaky knobs, presumably, to descend into the enemy deployment zone turn 1 and pounce on some unlucky gits. With fire support, of course, from the Copta above. If the Copta is too risky, he can also gain Infiltrate from the Pariah Nexus enhancements, which would make him really proper sneaky. Overall, this covers the first three of them. Just a side note with the bad moons, as I mentioned, the Mega Armor boss does have the better shooting. I would give him a modified weapon, preferably just giving him extra accuracy and extra AP, though of course you could bring any of those that you wanted. Those are just the ones that I would recommend to make him into the shootiest boss possible, which would be very fitting for the bad moons. And for the Goths, as I mentioned, the Crushing Armor or the Iron Gob sort of plays into that Goth aesthetic quite well of big armors or Iron Gobs. And as I mentioned, the boss pull is super useful for the keeping the boys in check, but we will cover that more in a later section. And for the Blood Axes, I mentioned the Chinork Warcopter, which is a Legends data sheet that allows you to drop in turn 1 with your helicopter, and then with Fastest Than You could get out and charge, which would be a really cool and thematic way for a bunch of sneaky knobs to drop in on the enemy. For the last three clans, we of course first start off with the fast lads of the Evil Sons. The Evil Sons only really fittingly have a war boss on Warbike or a War Trike for their leader. Both offer speed and a little bit of Daka, especially the War Trike, he has quite a few guns. Give one of them Follow Me lads, and for even more speed, aim for that coveted Resmeka's Reda Paint from the Bestest Boss loot. With that, these guys could be moving at a pretty insane 16 inches a turn, which makes them even faster than those pointy-eared Eldar. In terms of the snake bites, it honestly would just feel a little strange to not go with a beast boss and preferably one on top of a Squigosaur. With that Glory Hog enhancement, with the renowned heroes, and a modified Choppa, he can truly fulfill that snake bite idea of using old orky ways to drag down pretty much anything in the game with a nasty, huge damage Choppa, as well of course getting into the thick of the fight super quick thanks to being able to scout. This would be of course great for a nice and brutal and fast snakebite war boss, which is of course what you'd want. In terms of Death Skulls, I think I would go with a normal war boss, or maybe Mega Armor if you want to lean into the shooting theme, riding the battle in something like a Battle Fortress, which is a huge, super tough vehicle that has a lot of transport space. Give him faster than used to leap out and then punch to death some vehicles to add to his looted abomination that would make his Battle Fortress. And then, in terms of progression for a character like this, I would generally give him a modified melee weapon, increasing the damage or the strength, depending on what character you're using. And then, of course, would also make him have more attacks, usually, or maybe more AP if you're really going after the tough stuff. In terms of relics, the Frazzle Field Generator from the boss loot would not be a bad idea to give to him. Or maybe something like of course, a boss pull would also be useful. Snake Bite's pretty similar, just modified weapons and a boss pole will get you pretty far with something like that, and especially with the Frazzle Field generator. And Evil Sons, I would give them Resmech as Red Paint to make them super duper fast, and then maybe something like the Mounted Battle trait to give you +1 to advance and charge, or even +2 to your movement, which I believe you can get from Pariah Nexus itself, to make an Orc bike unit truly reach the point of too much speed, to the point where nothing would be safe from there anywhere on the board, especially with that automatic 6 inches advancing. Moving on to the more core mechanics, Stomping Points is how you measure the growth of your WA as well as how successful you're doing. When you each battle will generally grant you 1, winning grants an extra 2, and if the enemy warlord is destroyed, that also gains you an extra 2, so up to 5 per game, usually, no matter your standing or agendas. And then, if you expand your supply limit, you also gain 1, which is when you increase the size of your crusade army in general. And as you progress, you can earn more through, as I mentioned, agendas, as well as at certain amounts, they give you even more stomping points, as well as unlocking extra abilities. 0 to 9 stomping points, you're still a minor WA. You can't suffer Orcuctions, which we'll get into later, and each game you gain 1 stomping point. Once you get to 10 and through 24, you still get 1 stomping point. You can suffer Orcuctions, subtracting 1 from the roll if you lost, and you unlock custom jobs, which is always useful for your vehicles, which we will also cover later, but they of course allow you to beef up your vehicles in extra special ways. As I mentioned, Orcuctions we will cover in a later section. Moving on from there, you reach 25 to 49 stomping points, or stage 3 if you will. After each battle, you gain 2 stomping points, so that upgrades the minimum for a battle, or a maximum to a battle, excluding agendas, to 6 from 5. And then after each battle, you suffer an Orcuction, same as the others, and then you also unlock Bestest Boss Loot, which is very useful because some of those relics are insanely powerful, and they can also be applied to modified weapons, which again we will cover later, but in general you will want to have a Bestest Boss Loot on your boss, just because it is the Bestest Boss Loot. And then at 50 stomping points, you no longer gain stomping points. You suffer an Orcuction, of course, subtracting 2 from the roll if you've lost, so it's even worse if you lose. Custom jobs and Bestest Boss Loot are, of course, unlocked as well. So just once you reach this point, you are at the biggest you are going to get, and you need to be careful about losing games, because the Orcuctions can become very devastating, especially if you get a major ruction. But first, we have to cover the minor ructions, which we are going to cover in the next section, which is right now, actually. Orcuctions show how as a WA grows, more infighting and competition happens. When suffering an Orcuction, you take a leadership test using your WA boss's leadership characteristics. If you fail but do not roll a double, you suffer a minor ruction. If you fail but do roll a double, i.e. double 1s or double 2s, you suffer a major ruction. Regardless, if you suffer a minor or major ruction, roll a d6 and apply the effect below. On a 1, you select 2 Orc infantries with the lowest XP. In your Crusade force, roll a d6 for each. The higher roll gains 2 XP. The lower roll takes an out-of-action test, which could lead to a battle scar. The second one, you select 1 Orc vehicle from your Crusade force. It takes an out-of-action test. You can then select 1 mech in your army. They gain 2 XP. On a 3, in the next battle, before you call the WA, subtract 1 from units' leaderships. On 4, you select the Orky character. That has an enhancement or Crusade relic. Until the end of the next battle, they cannot use that, but if they are in the battle and they win, they gain 3 XP. 5, the next time you use increased supply limit, its cost is increased by 1 RP. During the next battle, at the start of the battle round, units from your army that start on the battlefield, or Psychers that start on the battlefield must test Battle Shock, and after the battle, each Orc Psyker unit in your Crusade army that isn't destroyed gains 3 XP. So these are all sort of mixed bags where they usually have some sort of negative for one unit but a benefit for another. For example, the first one, obviously one of your Orcs gets beat up, but one of your Orcs gets stronger. Next, the number 5 is probably the worst one, just because increased supply limit could slow you down if you can't buy that for a while, since it would then cost 2 RP instead of 1. Select and number 4 could definitely be detrimental to a character, especially if they rely on that relic or enhancement to deal with enemy vehicles and things like that they wouldn't be able to deal with normally. But the rest of them are fairly tame. But the major ructions are really, really not good. On a 1, you select 1 Orc infantry unit from your order of battle. That unit gains 1 battle scar. Now, battle scars are very debilitating and can lead to a unit being very underpowered and can snowball into them being destroyed completely if they get more than 3 battle scars. 2 is the same thing, but for Orc vehicles units, so also very bad. Number 3, you select 2 Orc characters in your order of battle, which is your entire force. Roll a d6 for each, adding 2 if you're rolling for the war boss. The higher roll gains 3 XP, and the other gains D3 battle scars. If you get a 3 on this, you need to find a way, whether it be through the requisition to repair them, or through some other way to clear your battle scars, because if you have 3 battle scars and you get one more, not only will you be super weak, so you're more likely to get one more. Once you get one more, you're out of your battle of order, and that unit is completely gone. 4, you select one of the following to apply. Reduce your stomping points by 10, or select one Weird Boy or War Boy from your order of battle. That model gains 1 battle scar. This highly incentivizes you to include a Weird Boy, because losing 10 stomping points would effectively put you back an entire battle, which is really not good. 5, during the next battle, you cannot use the Wah in the first or second round. This can be very bad for orcs, as they tend to rely on it in the early game to swing it in their favor, which you definitely don't want to lose out on. On a 6, you reduce your requisition points to 0. If your requisition points are already at 0, reduce your stomping points by 10 instead. This incentivizes orcs to at least keep 1 requisition point around. As I mentioned, losing that many stomping points is very, very detrimental. Now, major ructions won't happen very often, but you do need to be wary of them and want to make it as hard as possible for it to happen. But still, you do want to keep that in mind. Suffering major ructions can snowball into a very bad situation very quickly, especially if you're nearing the end of the game, where any difference in power can be so huge. In terms of agendas, these effectively act as your secondary missions or secondary primary objectives. If your Crusade army includes orcs, you can select these agendas. Scrap them at the end of the battle. Each orc unit from your Crusade army that is within range of 1 or more vehicle and or destroyed 1 or more vehicle models with a melee attack during this battle gains 1 XP. If 1 or more mech in your army gains XP from this agenda, you gain 2 stomping points. Solid enough against things like knights. Show them how it's done. Each time your warlord destroys an enemy character, monster, or vehicle unit, gains 2 XP, or 3 if that warlord is your WA boss. This is really useful, again, against knights, and especially against something like custodes that will have a lot of characters. Scragged Achilles Gits is one of the more general purpose one. At the start of the battle, select 1 unit from your opponent's Crusade army that has the highest points value. If tied, the opponent chooses, that unit is the Killiest Git. Each time the Killiest Git is reduced to below half strength from an orc unit, that unit gains 3 XP. And then when that unit is destroyed, it also gains, when a unit destroys it, they gain 3 XP. And if the Killiest Git is destroyed, you gain 3 stomping points. Overwhelming aggression at the end of the battle for each table quarter. If there are more orc units wholly within that quarter than your opponent's units, select 1 unit in that corner. Each of those units, select 1 unit in each quarter. Each of those units gains 2 XP. If you were able to select 1 from each quarter, you gain 2 stomping points. Also super useful against things like knights and custodes. Generally, Scrag the Killiest Gits will be your safest bet, but if you really want to snowball your characters, show them how it's done can be really useful with the right kind of fast war boss that can just tear through the enemy army. In terms of scrap them, I think that is also useful if your war boss maybe isn't super well equipped to deal with vehicles, just because this allows more for your units to gain more XP, as well as the fact that even if you end the battle, say you have some Gretchen, you could charge them into a Rhino, and they would still get the XP, which would be useful because they're not going to be killing things, so they need to eke out any extra AP that they can get. But aside from that, I think the Scragged Achilles Gits is the most general purpose, and overwhelming aggression as well also works really well against most armies, just because unless you're playing something like other orcs or Tyranids, you generally will outnumber your opponent just because of how orcs work as a faction. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing, of course. Next, we have to move on to the requisitions. So first up, we have Doc's Orders. Purchase this requisition after your WA boss gains a battle scar during the next battle he fights in. If that unit destroys 1 or more enemy units, he gains 2 XP. If 1 or more of those units was a monster or vehicle, he gains an additional 2 XP. At the end of the battle, if your WA boss gained 4 XP from this requisition, choose one of the following. Remove the battle scar he got before this requisition, and your war boss gains an additional 5 XP. My general rule of thumb is if it's early in the campaign, just give him the extra XP and pay the requisition points to heal him. If it's late in the campaign and he's super built up, use this to remove the battle scar, because that's 1 RP, which is a lot cheaper than the 4 it can be from the normal one. Time for new gear, especially effectively lets you replace your war boss with a different kind. So from, say, Mega Armor to Beast Boss on Squigosaur, they keep all the XP and gain the battle honors for its ranks. That new war boss is your new WA boss. You don't lose 20 stomping points for removing your old WA boss, as you're effectively just re-equipping him. Custom jobs are 2 requisition points. Purchase this requisition at any time. If your order of battle includes 1 or more mech, select 1 vehicle from your order of battle that can gain a battle trait. That vehicle gains 1 battle trait from the custom job section. If that unit has max battle honors, you can replace one of them, and each vehicle can only have 1 custom job. Generally super useful, as the custom jobs are super useful. Best boss loot is effectively the same thing, but for your WA boss to give him a bestest boss loot from that table, with the same qualifications, where he gains the bestest boss loot. If he's already at max battle honors, he can replace one of his crusade relics with a bestest boss loot one. Both of these are integral to getting the most out of your army. Once you get enough stomping points to get either of these, I highly recommend saving some requisition points to get these ASAP, because they can be so instrumental in building up your orky units into being super, super dangerous, which you generally want, obviously, because you're orcs, and the killier something is, the better it is. And bestest boss loot can make or break certain builds with characters, which is always interesting and allows for more possibilities, which of course you always want, though do keep in mind they're expensive, so don't go willy-nilly with these things, because they're 2 requisition points apiece. Moving on to battle traits, when an orc unit gains a battle trait, you can use one of the tables here to determine the trait. So first up we have mob units, which are boys or beast snagga boys. The first one is Dead Choppy. While this WA is active, each time a model in this unit makes a melee attack, reroll 1s to wound. Super useful, just to make them slightly more efficient against all targets, and is a solid thing for any Choppa boys. Bionic Targeters, each time this unit makes a ranged attack, add 1 to the hit roll. Good for your shooty boys if you want to run them here, which I personally do run a unit of them in my crusade. This does just make them more effective, especially the heavy weapons that they carry around, and in general it's a nice upgrade. Daca Lads, once per battle, select an enemy unit hit by this unit's ranged attack. They must test a battle shock test. I think this is quite a weak trait, and while I do like to go for fluffy things, I generally prefer when fluffy things are either more consistent or simply do more. If this was every shooting round, I think it would be much better. Dead Keen is an interesting one. You can target this unit with Heroic Intervention for 0 CP, which is generally super useful, just because that allows them to jump into combat even quicker every turn, and allows them to protect units nearby for better. Always good. Opportunistic, once per battle in your command phase, you can use this ability to add 1 to their OC until the end of the turn. Also, generally pretty useful for flipping an objective, and good if you are in a desperate situation to steal an objective, because having 3 OC boys is really useful. Gnarly Scars, while an enemy unit is engagement range of enemy models, reduce their leadership by 1. I guess this could have some interesting combos with Daca Lads, because you could shoot into combat with your pistols, and with Gnarly Scars, their leadership would reduce by 1, would be very useful at battle shocking enemy orcs or something like that, though not overall the most useful. Mounted units have Ride 'em Down, add 1 to advance and charge rolls, always useful. High-speed Daca, each time a model in this unit makes a ranged attack, add 1 to the hit roll, good for things like war bikes that have a lot of shooting. And then Smog Belches, this unit gains the smoke keyword, and once per battle can use the smoke screen strat for free. This is super useful for just being harder to kill, which is useful for orcs that can sometimes be a little bit fragile, so making them just that little bit harder to kill is useful, and can be put on things like Swighog Boys, which is not only a funny visual, but I think is also a very solid buff for those guys, just to, again, keep them a little bit more durable. Given how durable they are, it's a nice thing to double down on. Mech units only have 2 specific battle traits, but they're both solid. Boss Mech, if this model was in the battle, you could ignore 1 failed out of action test for an orc vehicles unit, it is passed instead. This is useful if you're using 1 big central vehicle, like I am with my Kill Crusher tank, and in general will just keep your vehicles a little healthier. And then Mechanical Maniac gives him a 5+ invulnerable save, just a little extra defense should his bodyguard get shot out. Pain Boys, or Pain Boss units, can effectively get the same thing. Recycler, if he was in the battle, ignore a failed out of action test for an orcs unit. Excluding vehicles, it's passed instead. And Bad Reputation gives him a 5+ invulnerable save to represent him modifying himself because people get angry at him all the time. Recycler is super useful just to keep your army generally helpful, and it does incentivize you to run both Pain Boys and mech units just to keep your army working in tip-top shape. In terms of those custom jobs we mentioned earlier, the first one is the Fortress on Wheels. It is technically Fortress, but I think calling it a Fortress is just more accurate. This is for a truck or battle wagon only. You give them a 5+ invulnerable save, first off, and then you also give to them a a +2 to their, +1 to their toughness. This is mainly useful on battle wagons, as going from toughness 8 to toughness 9 is marginally useful against Melta, but not too much else. But the 5+ invulnerable save is still very nice, and would make a battle wagon with its hard case on super tough, being at toughness 13 with that 5+ invul. Shooting your guns is my favorite of the custom jobs. Each time this unit is selected to shoot, roll a d6. On a 1, ranged weapons equipped by models in this unit have the hazardous keyword. On a 2 to 5, improve their ballistic skill by 1. On a 6, improve the ballistic skill by 1, and the weapon gains ignores cover. This is huge, as orcs are famously inaccurate, so going from hitting on 5s to hitting on 4s is effectively a 50% damage buff, just straight up, and is super useful, especially with mechs, because then you can give them a further +1 to hit to get them hitting just as accurately as Marines, and then if you add on a customized weapon, it allows you to be even more accurate. This is why I love Crusade so much, by the way. It's all this interlocking fun stuff. The Shaka Hull, in the fight phase, each time an enemy unit fights, if this unit was the target of one or more attacks, after those attacks roll a d6. On a 4+, that enemy unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. Nothing too special, but could be useful for something like a vehicle that has no counterattack. Stompomatic Pistons is for walkers, excluding Killicans. Add 2 to this model's movement characteristic, and add 1 to advance and charge. Super useful for melee walkers, less useful for shooter walkers, though this is still a huge buff for Death Dreads or Gorkonauts, for example, even a Stompa. Fungus Fuel Injecta is for the Speed Freaks only, but remember this is vehicles only, so this can't go on bikes. You add 2 to their move characteristic, and once per battle you can target this unit with Smokescreen for 0 CP. This is pretty solid, as the buggies tend not be the most tough. They want us to move fast, and smoke helps them keep safe. So if you're using something like the drill buggy, this is, I think, an auto-include on that unit, if we're speaking in sort of fanciful terms. Overall, shooting your guns is definitely my favorite, though. So, in terms of the Orky relics, we of course have Artificer, which is the basic. You can get these at any rank. The Boss Pole is a sleeper hit. It improved the leadership characteristic of the bearer by 1. Once the bearer has participated in at least 3 battles against Adeptus Astartes and has destroyed a unit in each of those, he gets to ignore leadership modifiers when taking tests. This is mainly useful on your WA boss, just so you don't suffer ructions as often, as he'll be at leadership 5, which is a lot harder to fail on. Dead Art Armor, infantry are mounted only. You add 1 to the bearer's wound characteristic. Each attack allocated to the bearer worsen the AP by 1. This is just a nice durability buff, especially for something that's already super tough, like a mega armored boss. This makes them very resilient to snipers. Antiquity you can get at rank 3, I believe it is, in terms of your levels. I forgot the name. The Glowy Gizmo upgrade is for mechs only, which you add 1 to the ballistic skill and strength of the bearer's ranged weapons, and you add 6-inch range to the bearer's weapons. And then you can activate the relic whenever they shoot. You roll a d6. On a 1, the bearer can't shoot. On a 2 to 3, the bearer's weapons have hazardous. And on a 4+, until the end of the phase, they gain sustained hits 1, and 5+ are critical. This is a huge shooting buff for the orcs. They'll be hitting very accurately, and they'll be hitting very deadly with those 5+ criticals. And the hazardous debuff isn't the worst, as many of the mech's weapons are innately hazardous anyways, so it's just kind of doubling down on that. And then Wazgit's Copper Skullcap is for Weird Boys, or Word Boys. Each time the bearer makes a psychic attack, add 1 to the hit roll, and if it destroys any models, he regains up to 2 lost wounds. This is good for keeping your psychic boys healthy, so they don't have to take any out-of-action tests to help brun you on those Orcuctions. In terms of legendary relics, you have the Wa boss, sort of legendary Choppa of the Wa. This is a pretty powerful one. You select 1 weapon the bearer is equipped with. This is for your Wa boss only, by the way. Then you add 1 to the strength and the armor penetration of that weapon. In addition, each time you call the Wa, if the bearer is on the battlefield, melee weapons equipped by orc models have the lethal hits ability. This is a army-wide huge damage buff, given how many times orcs attack in melee, and of course +1 attack and AP is also really good, and this doesn't replace the weapon, it only modifies it, so this can be applied to modified weapons if you're trying to make an insanely killy claw or choppa, which is, of course, what every orc wants to do, really. This you can only get at Legendary, which means you need 50 experience points, so this will not be in play till the end of the game, but something this powerful could definitely seal in a victory in a Crusade game, in my opinion, and overall makes this a no-brainer once you reach that point. Moving on from there, we do have a few last relics to cover, the Bestest Boss Loot relics. So these are more unique ones. You can only have 1 at a time, and they're all WA Boss exclusive. so make sure you pick wisely as they're quite expensive to replace. Resmeka's Redder Paint is Waboss mounted only. You add 2 to the move characteristic, which is even more speed that can stack with the enhancements. So you could have super fast bikers or Squighog boys. And then the Bear's unit also has fights first, which makes them super hard to charge, as well as in general, just being in general very solid in protracted combats. The Iron Gob, at the start of the fight phase, you select 1 enemy infantry unit in engagement range, roll a d6 on a 2+, the enemy unit suffers 3 mortal wounds and must take a battle shock test. I think the Iron Gob is alright, though probably the weakest out of these, mainly because it can only target infantry, where a later one can target more than that. Though I think the flat 3 mortal wounds is super useful against things like Terminators, as on a 2+, that's just a straight up dead Terminator unless they have mortal wound protection. The Frazzle Field Generator is a simple but very effective one, much like orks themselves. You select 1 melee weapon equipped by the bearer, that weapon gains devastating wounds. This is super useful just to, again, continue building up on 1 Choppa or Claw to just make it into an insanely deadly weapon. Once you get a modified weapon and then you get the legendary Choppa of the Wa and the Frazzle Field Generator, you'll be melting things. It's honestly hilarious how powerful war bosses can get, and that's why I love Crusade so much, because you get to build these crazy units that are just so fun to use. The Crushing Armor is generally pretty useful. The bearer is a 4+ invuln, so more resilience to snipers. You add 1 to the bearer's wound characteristic, which again makes them more resilient to snipers and tougher in general. And each time the bearer ends a charge move, select 1 enemy unit, roll a d6 on a 2+, the enemy suffers d3 mortal wounds, so similar to the Iron Gob, though with more benefits, and in general I'd say is a little better, and is really useful if you need a war boss to be super tough, because they'll be in the fight for a long time, which most war bosses will, so this is definitely a solid take-all-comers choice. The Shootiest Blasta, you select 1 equipped model, 1 weapon equipped by the model, ranged weapon. That weapon gains Melta 3. This is a weirdly potent one that at first glance seems kind of pointless, but then you realize if you put this on something like the Mega Boss's custom Shooter, he will be having all those attacks at damage 4 at half range, which means even though they won't have crazy AP, any wounds this thing chips will kill Terminators, will massively damage tanks. It's really quite a powerful one, and you can even put it on something like a War Killer, Death Killer War Trike, and then its flamethrower would be damage 4 at close range, which is just really funny. It's just a really funny visual in general. Of course, you do need to still punch through the saves, but given that this, again, is simply modifying a weapon, this can be applied to a modified weapon as it's not replacing the weapon. So, in my opinion, this is definitely the best for your shooty bosses, unsurprisingly. But don't underestimate this. This can really take a modified big shooter into something surprisingly terrifying to most kinds of infantry, and even to tanks, just given how big any failed saves will be. A shout out to Resmeka's Redder Paint, just because with the enhancements and battle traits, you'll have your biker units, your mounted units going so fast. They'll be moving, 22 inches every turn. They'll be charging after that in the Wa. Orcs like to go fast, and this makes you go the fastest. I think it can make some of the fastest units in the game. Frazzle Field is a take-all-comers, generally useful. Bosses always hit hard in melee. This just makes them hit harder more so. The Crushing Armor makes them a good bit tougher just with the extra wound, especially if you stack it with the Dead Ard armor, because then you have 2 sets of armor, which is very orky and very proper, but it makes you super tough. You'll have 2 extra wounds, -1 AP, 4+ invulnerable. It'll make him very tough to kill. And then the Shootiest Blasta, fantastic for making orc shooting just surprisingly deadly, and makes every save that someone has to roll puts them on the edge of their seat because of the chance of them taking 4 damage, which is very big. Overall, that does bring us to the end of the orc-specific Crusade rules, and I do plan to do a generic Crusade rules video very soon, but I figured that it's Orktober, I'm building an Orc Crusade, and I wanted to cover it because I really like orcs, and I like Crusade because it's really fun. I highly recommend you try out some Crusade battles with your friends and just have some fun. I feel like a lot of us 40k players get railroaded into playing competitively when we don't really want to. We just end up, all the content we ingest is competitive content, so it puts us into that mindset. And Crusade is a good way to go back to that silliness that 40k has all the time, but sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.